Tonight, before we step back in time to the age of ice and endless winter, let me first ask you something gentle. How are you feeling today? From which country are you listening? And what time is it there right now? Perhaps it is late at night, perhaps the early hours of morning, or maybe the middle of the day when you are simply searching for a quiet escape. Wherever you are most welcome here. If you find these calm history stories helpful, I invite you softly, with no rush at all, to like this video, subscribe for more sleepy journeys through the past, and if you wish, gently tap the bell so you are reminded of the next story. Nothing urgent, no pressure, just an open door for whenever you want to return to this calm space. And now, let us slowly wander into the cold, vast silence of the Ice Age and discover how people managed to survive in such a world. In the stillness of ancient times, the Earth looked very different from the world we know today. Thick glaciers covered large parts of the continents, stretching for hundreds of miles, reflecting the pale light of the sun like an endless frozen mirror. Imagine standing at the edge of such an expanse, where the air was sharp and crisp, the ground hard beneath your feet, and the horizon seemed swallowed by sheets of ice. For people living then, this was not a distant view seen only on expeditions or pictures, but the very environment they faced each day. The Ice Age was not one single winter, it lasted for thousands of years, shaping landscapes, rivers, mountains, and the lives of every living creature. Humanity, small in number and fragile against the cold, had to find ways to endure, not just for a season, but for generations. This was the quiet beginning of resilience, born not from comfort but from necessity, where survival itself became an art of patience and cooperation. Picture small groups of families gathered together, searching for warmth in places where the frozen wind could not reach. They often sought caves, natural shelters carved by time, where walls of stone could provide some protection from the biting air outside. Inside these dim spaces, flickering firelight painted shadows across rough walls, reminding them of safety and perhaps of hope. The fire, by the will of Allah, was their most faithful companion, not created by human power alone, but discovered and used with gratitude, because warmth and light were gifts beyond measure in a world of ice. In the gentle crackling of flames, in the glowing embers that pushed back the darkness, people found the strength to rest for another day. They huddled close, wrapped in furs, listening to the howl of the wind outside, comforted by the simple fact that they were together. In those moments, survival was not just about enduring the cold, but about remembering that community gave strength greater than any storm. The nights during the Ice Age were especially long, and they carried with them a silence that felt heavier than any blanket. Imagine lying down on a bed of furs, the cave wall at your back, and hearing only the soft breathing of others beside you, the distant whistle of wind outside, and the occasional pop of firewood. It was in these moments of stillness that humans may have felt their own smallness most deeply, realizing how vast and powerful the earth around them truly was. And yet, in that quiet, they also found a rhythm, a way to measure time, not by clocks or schedules, but by the slow passage of stars across the night sky, or by the returning call of animals that roamed in search of food. For them, each night was not just darkness to endure, but an opportunity to prepare their minds for the challenges of the next sunrise. Sleep itself was a tool of survival, a gift to restore their bodies for the endless effort of living. During the daylight hours, when the sun managed to break through clouds of snow and mist, people ventured out from their shelters. The land was harsh, but it was not empty. Herds of reindeer, bison, and sometimes the towering woolly mammoths roamed across the frozen plains. scraping through snow to find grasses hidden beneath. These animals were not only part of the landscape, they were lifelines. By the will of Allah, they provided food, skins for clothing, and bones that could be shaped into tools. But hunting them was no simple task. It required patience, courage, and most importantly, cooperation. People worked together, signaling one another, setting traps, and sometimes guiding animals toward difficult ground where they could be more easily captured. No one could do it alone. It was a lesson as old as humanity itself, that survival in the hardest times depended not only on strength, but on trust in others. As important as hunting was, it could not sustain people by itself. The seasons, even during the Ice Age, shifted, and there were moments when the snow receded, when plants pushed their way stubbornly through the frozen soil. At these times, humans gathered what the land offered: berries, roots, seeds, and nuts. These foods, though small, were precious, providing energy and variety in a diet that might otherwise have been nothing but meat. Storing them carefully meant the difference between hardship and survival when the snow returned in full force. Families passed down knowledge of which plants were safe, which roots carried strength, and which berries could bring harm. This wisdom was not written in books, but shared in quiet words around the fire, taught from one generation to the next. In such ways, survival became not only about what hands could build or catch, but about what minds could remember and teach. Knowledge was a shield against hunger, just as surely as fire was a shield against cold. Tools played a central role in this daily battle with nature. With simple stones chipped into sharp edges, bones carved into needles, and wood shaped into spears, humans extended their abilities far beyond the limits of bare hands. Imagine the careful patience it took to strike a stone again and again until it broke into a sharp flake, perfect for cutting. Or the focus required to thread sinew through a hollow bone to make a needle that could stitch hides together. These tools, though simple in appearance, were powerful in their purpose. They represented not just survival, but creativity, an ability to see potential in the materials the earth provided. By Allah's will, even the hardest stone became useful in human hands. Each tool was a quiet victory, a reminder that although the Ice Age world was vast and cold, humans carried within them the gift of thought and patience. Travel during this frozen era was not easy, but it was necessary. People could not stay in one place forever, because food was never permanent in such a land. Herds moved with the seasons, and humans followed. This meant carrying what they owned, children, belongings, and memories, across landscapes that seemed endless. But they did not travel alone. Families joined together with other families, forming bands and tribes, so that their numbers gave safety and strength. In these groups, each person had a role. Some hunted, some prepared food, some cared for the young, while others remembered paths and stories of the land. The journey itself was part of survival, and the bonds made on the trail often lasted longer than the shelters they built. In the steady rhythm of walking together, people learned that even in a frozen world, companionship could warm the spirit more than fire ever could. The Ice Age was not only about physical survival, it was also about meaning. Inside dark caves, humans left behind paintings of animals, lines, and symbols. These images were more than decoration. They were memories, messages, perhaps even prayers of gratitude, acknowledging the life around them and the mercy of survival granted to them. With natural colors taken from earth and stone, they painted mammoths, bison, and deer, often with a sense of motion that still stirs the imagination today. These creations may have been a way of teaching younger members of the group, or of remembering hunts, or of expressing a connection with the world they lived in. Whatever the reason, they remind us that even in the coldest and hardest times, humans carried an inner fire of thought, reflection, and expression. Survival was about more than food and shelter. It was also about remembering who they were and why they endured. And so, as we imagine these quiet beginnings of humanity during the Ice Age, we see not only the struggle, but the remarkable patience that guided them through. They faced nights that seemed endless, winters that lasted for lifetimes, and dangers that surrounded them at every turn. Yet, by the mercy of Allah, they endured. They found warmth in fire, nourishment in the land, tools in stone, and strength in one another. Each small act striking sparks to light a flame, stitching a hide into a coat, sharing food with a neighbor was part of a much larger story of survival. And now, as you listen, safe and warm in your own place, you can reflect on how extraordinary it is that we are here at all, descendants of those who once sat huddled around firelight in frozen caves. Their quiet beginnings are our beginnings too, carried across time, whispering through history, waiting to be remembered in nights like this one. When we imagine the people of the Ice Age, it is easy to see them only as struggling survivors, but their lives held moments of calm and tenderness as well. Picture a child learning from a parent how to hold a stone tool, or how to listen carefully for the sound of animals moving in the distance. Picture the quiet laughter that might have risen when stories were shared around a fire. Stories passed down not to impress, but to teach and to comfort. Even in the midst of hardship, there was room for gentleness. The Ice Age was not only about bitter winds and endless snow. It was also about families staying together, about bonds that grew stronger because they were tested every day. The human heart, softened by mercy, found ways to carry joy even into frozen lands. This was perhaps the greatest gift given to them, the ability to hold on to hope, even when the world outside seemed merciless. As years passed, generation after generation, these early humans became experts in reading the land around them. They learned to follow the signs left in the snow, the tracks of animals, the shifting of clouds, the changes in the wind that hinted at storms. Every small detail mattered, because life depended on recognizing the patterns hidden within nature. In this way, survival became a form of knowledge, a deep understanding written not in books but in memory and practice. By the will of Allah, they were granted the intelligence to notice, to remember, and to teach. This gift of awareness set them apart, allowing them to live in places where other creatures could not endure. Their quiet observations, passed through careful words and actions, were the foundation of wisdom that still echoes in human history today. The Ice Age also shaped the way people viewed their journeys. Traveling across vast stretches of frozen land, they had no maps, no roads, and no signs to follow. Yet they found direction by watching the sun, the stars, the shapes of rivers, and the positions of mountains. Imagine the patience it took to walk for days, guided only by natural landmarks, carrying the hope of food and safety. Each step was slow, deliberate, and purposeful. The weight of survival pressed upon them, but they continued, because moving forward was the only way to find tomorrow's chance. Their footprints in the snow, fading under fresh storms, remind us that life itself is a path we walk without certainty, trusting in what has been given and in what may lie ahead. In this endless rhythm of searching, hunting, gathering, and moving, humans built traditions that carried them forward. They created ways of dividing tasks, of caring for children, of teaching young hunters, of preparing food together. These traditions were not written, yet they shaped identity, telling each person where they belonged and what role they played in survival. Community was not an option, which was the very structure of life. To be alone in the Ice Age was to face danger without protection, but to be part of a group was to carry strength multiplied many times over. Unity was survival, and survival was unity. And so, even in the harshest of landscapes, humans built the foundation of societies that would one day grow into villages, towns, and civilizations. When we think of fire again, let us remember not only its light and warmth, but also its meaning. The fire was a gathering point. It drew people together after long days, offering not just heat, but a place to share stories, to plan for the next hunt, to teach children lessons of caution and courage. Fire was the heart of the group, a quiet reminder that even when the outside world was cold and dark, there was still a center of warmth where hope lived. By Allah's mercy, that small circle of light gave people the courage to continue, night after night, year after year. Without fire, survival would have been impossible, but with it, survival became community, and community became life. The earth itself, though harsh, carried signs of mercy as well. Rivers continued to flow beneath sheets of ice. Forests stood where glaciers could not reach, and animals adapted alongside humans, moving where food could be found. By Allah's command, balance was preserved, and in that balance, humans found opportunities to live. The Ice Age was a test, but also a reminder that the world, though vast and severe, was still a place where life was made possible. Every cave, every shelter, every patch of edible plants was part of this design. Survival was not just the result of human effort, it was the unfolding of a greater will, guiding them step by step, granting them strength to endure. As time moved on, the Ice Age slowly began to loosen its hold. Glaciers melted, rivers widened, and forests began to spread once more. For the people who had lived through centuries of cold, these changes must have seemed both strange and miraculous. They adjusted once again, finding new foods, new shelters, and new challenges in a changing world. The quiet beginning of humanity in the Ice Age was not the end of the story, it was the foundation. It shaped resilience, patience, and the habit of working together, lessons that would echo through every future chapter of history. Without those early trials, the story of humanity would not be the same. Their endurance is the reason we can sit here today, reflecting on their lives in comfort and peace. Now, as you listen to this gentle recounting, safe in your own time and place, perhaps you feel a sense of connection, a reminder that the struggles of the past are not so far away, because they live on in the strength of those who came before us. Each of us carries within our lives the legacy of survival, patience, and endurance. It is a legacy written not in books alone, but in the very fact that we exist. The Ice Age was not just an age of hardship, but an age that shaped the story of humanity into one of perseverance. And perhaps tonight, as you rest, this story can remind you that challenges are part of a longer journey, and every difficulty carries lessons that endure. Let the last image stay with you. A small group of humans huddled in a cave, firelight flickering on the walls, while outside the ice stretches into the horizon. They sit quietly, breathing the same air, sharing warmth, and waiting for another dawn. They do not know that their endurance will echo across thousands of years, but they know that they must hold on. This is the quiet beginning of history, where survival was the story itself, and every breath was a victory. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, may that quiet beginning soothe your mind, reminding you that even in the coldest times, hope always finds a way. And before we close this chapter of our journey into the Ice Age, I would like to invite you, softly and without urgency, to share your thoughts in the comments. Perhaps you can tell us where you are listening from, or what part of this story felt most calming to you. Your reflections not only help this channel grow, but also create a small community of listeners from around the world, gathered here just like those early humans gathered around the fire. If you wish, write a gentle word and let it join this circle of calm voices across time and distance. And with that, let us rest this segment, leaving the quiet beginning of humanity in the stillness of the Ice Age, until we meet again in another story. When we step deeper into the story of the Ice Age, one of the greatest companions of humanity comes into view: fire. Not a tool made by hands alone, but a discovery that changed survival into something more than endurance. Fire was not just light against the night, not only heat against the cold, it was a presence that gave courage, a steady glow in a world of shadows. Imagine sitting in a cave, the wind screaming outside, yet within, flames dance and smoke curls gently upward. That circle of warmth was life itself, and people guarded it with care as if it were their most fragile treasure. The discovery of fire was not the work of a single moment, but the result of patience, curiosity, and need. Sparks struck from stone, embers preserved from lightning-scorched trees, these were beginnings that humans learned to nurture. Keeping fire alive was as important as finding food or water. If it went out, the cold would creep back in, the dark would press close again, and safety would be lost. By Allah's will, fire was granted as a means of protection, and humans became its keepers, watching the flames as they would watch over children or kin. Within its glow, fire offered warmth that seeped into bones, easing the stiffness caused by endless cold. Nights no longer felt like eternal prisons of ice, for there was comfort in gathering close to a blaze. Families huddled together, letting the heat loosen their muscles, letting the flames remind them that not every part of the world was hostile. The body, restored by fire's warmth, found strength to rise again with each dawn. What seemed unbearable became bearable, not by human strength alone, but through the mercy granted in every spark and ember. But fire's gift was not only warmth, it was also a shield. Animals that prowled the night, wolves or great cats, feared the glow and the crackle. To humans, who were smaller and more fragile than these hunters, this was protection beyond weapons. A simple circle of flame meant the difference between safety and danger. The fire, humble in size, stood as a boundary that stronger creatures dared not cross. In this way, people learned that survival was not about fighting every threat, but about creating a barrier of light that warned danger away. Cooking was another secret hidden within fire's flames. Raw meat, though it could be eaten, carried risks and was hard to chew. But when laid upon heated stones or skewered above flames, meat softened, became safer, and offered more strength. Roots and plants, once bitter, could be made edible when touched by heat. By Allah's mercy, fire unlocked nourishment from food that might otherwise have been wasted. Meals became not only more filling, but more varied, giving energy for the long days of travel and the difficult hunts. Fire turned what was harsh into what was sustaining. Beyond the practical, fire also became a place of gathering. It drew people together in circles, a natural center where voices rose in quiet talk, where elders shared knowledge, and where stories of hunts and journeys passed from one generation to the next. The crackle of burning wood was like a rhythm beneath the voices, steady and calm. Children listened, wide-eyed, learning not only facts, but the spirit of their people, the courage, the caution, the patience that survival required. Around the fire, the Ice Age world felt less lonely, for community found its heartbeat in those glowing embers. Fire gave time. Without it, nights would have been filled only with cold and sleep, but with its light, humans extended their waking hours. They could work longer, prepare hides, sharpen tools, and repair shelters even after the sun had gone. Tasks that would have been left for daylight could be finished under the watch of flames. This gave them a rhythm of life that was no longer bound only to the rising and setting of the sun. By the will of Allah, fire stretched their hours, and with those hours came more chances to endure and thrive. Even the smoke of fire carried uses. It drove away insects, it cured meat for preservation, and it scented the air, marking a place as human and lived in. The smoke rose into the sky like a signal, telling others where a group might be gathered. Though simple, it was a sign of presence, a mark of humanity upon the vast and frozen earth. In the Ice Age, where isolation was a danger as great as hunger, the signal of smoke could mean the closeness of allies, or the reminder that one was not alone. Keeping fire alive was a duty, a responsibility that could not be ignored. Someone always watched, feeding sticks or dried grass, stirring embers, blowing gently to keep the red glow alive. To let it die was to invite hardship, for starting it again was never guaranteed. In this way, fire was not only a tool but a teacher, instilling discipline, patience, and awareness. The flames reminded humans that survival depended on constancy, on attention to what seemed small but was truly vital. A glowing coal, carried carefully in bark or bone, was a treasure greater than gold, for it held the promise of warmth and light. Over time, fire shaped not only daily life, but also the way humans understood their world. It became part of every plan, every journey, every home. Without it, people were exposed to the full cruelty of the Ice Age. With it, they could carve out moments of rest, safety, and even comfort. Fire was not worshipped, nor could it exist without the will of Allah, but it was respected as a gift placed within human reach. Through it, survival became less desperate, more sustainable, and more hopeful. The power of fire was not its on it, was a sign of mercy, a reminder that even in the coldest of ages, light and warmth had not been denied. As generations passed, fire became part of human memory, something every group knew they could not live without. Children grew up watching their elders tend to the flames, learning early the importance of gathering wood, protecting embers, and keeping sparks alive. It was not only a skill but a tradition, woven into the rhythm of life. Each new generation became the guardian of fire, carrying the responsibility as carefully as they carried their tools and food. This continuity allowed human knowledge to survive alongside their bodies, proving that wisdom was as necessary as shelter and food in the long winter nights. Fire also changed how humans saw their places of dwelling. A cave without fire was only stone and shadow, but once flames flickered across its walls, it became a home. The warmth softened the harshness of stone, the light pushed back the weight of darkness, and the smoke gave the air a sense of presence, a reminder that life was being lived there. In this way, fire transformed spaces, turning empty shelters into sanctuaries. The same cave that once echoed with silence now hummed with quiet voices, the sound of crackling wood and the comfort of belonging. The influence of fire reached into the very structure of communities. It encouraged people to gather in circles, to share, to plan, and to create bonds of trust. Without fire, gatherings might have ended with sunset, but with it, conversations stretched deeper into the night. Here, plans for hunting were made, disputes were settled, and memories were preserved in the minds of the young. Fire was not only a tool, but a silent participant in the growth of cooperation. By Allah's will, it helped human beings realize that strength was not found in isolation, but in togetherness. Over time, the mastery of fire allowed humans to spread farther into lands once thought uninhabitable. The cold no longer barred them, for they carried with them the promise of warmth and safety. With fire, forests could be cleared, bones and hides could be prepared more easily, and journeys could be made with greater security. Fire was the companion that walked beside them wherever they went, silent but always ready to serve. This expansion of life across the frozen earth was not by chance, but by the steady application of patience and care, taught and remembered through countless seasons. Even in its most simple form, a single flame held a meaning beyond its size. It represented survival, resilience, and the refusal to surrender to a world that seemed colder than hope itself. Each spark struck from stone was not only a victory of hands, but also a reminder of the mercy of Allah, who made the world in such a way that light could be coaxed from stone and wood. In this truth lay reassurance that even in the darkest night, there was always the possibility of warmth, always the chance of light. Fire was a reminder that difficulty was never the final word, that every challenge carried within it the seeds of endurance. The smoke rising from fire was often the last sight before sleep, curling upward, vanishing into the unseen sky. For those who lived in the Ice Age, this gentle movement was more than a physical sign. It was the closing of one day and the promise of another. To lie down with fire still burning was to rest in safety, knowing that the night would pass without the fear of freezing. In the glow of firelight, humans dreamed, perhaps of hunts, perhaps of journeys, or perhaps of warmer lands they longed to see. Sleep, softened by warmth, was itself a gift granted in those fleeting hours. If we listen closely, we can almost hear the sound of those ancient flames. The steady crackle, the faint hiss as wood turned to glowing embers, the shifting glow across stone walls. It was the background music of survival. Such sounds carried comfort, reminding every listener that life continued even when the outside world seemed lifeless. Fire was both presence and reassurance, a steady companion to weary minds. Without words, it spoke. "You are not alone in the cold." That message, repeated every night, built strength within hearts. Long before dawn returned, as the Ice Age continued, fire remained central to every aspect of human life. It was not something extraordinary anymore. It became ordinary, essential, and unquestionable. Just as food and water were sought, fire too was always part of the search. In this way, survival became a balance of effort, gathering wood as carefully as one gathered berries, tending embers as carefully as one tended children. The harmony between people and fire was not one of control, but of stewardship, where humans were given the responsibility to nurture what had been entrusted to them. And so, when we reflect on the power of fire, we see that it was more than a tool of survival. It was a teacher of patience, a guardian of safety, a maker of community, and a reminder of mercy. In every spark and every flame, people of the Ice Age found reasons to continue, to endure, and to believe that another day would come. Fire lit the path forward, not as an idol, but as a gift, entrusted to humanity to be used wisely. This was the quiet brilliance of survival, not conquering the cold, but learning to live within it, guided by the glow of flame. And here, we close this segment on the power of fire, that faithful companion of the Ice Age. If this calm journey has brought you a sense of peace, I gently invite you to subscribe, so you may return again when the next story is ready. In our following video, we will step into another chapter of history, ancient Rome, exploring what Romans did for fun, from their games and gatherings to the quiet pastimes that filled their days. Until then, may the glow of tonight's fire remain with you, steady and calm as you rest. In the endless cold of the Ice Age, fire gave warmth to bodies, but it could not follow humans everywhere. When the flames were left behind and the wind cut across the open plains, survival depended on another gift, clothing made from nature itself. At first glance, the world seemed barren, nothing but ice, snow, and stone. Yet, by the mercy of Allah, it held animals that carried thick furs and hides, designed perfectly to endure cold. Humans, fragile and bare-skinned, learned to take these coverings and shape them into protection for their own bodies. In this way, clothing became the second shield, as vital as fire, against the bitter cold. Imagine a family preparing after a hunt. The animal provided food for the body, but its skin, carefully removed, became a promise of future survival. With stone blades, hides were scraped clean, stretched, and dried. This work required patience, for without proper care, the material would stiffen and become unusable. Women, men, and even older children took part, each learning how to prepare fur and leather so that it might serve for months, even years. The sound of scraping echoed in the shelters, slow and steady, a rhythm of survival as important as any heartbeat. Clothing in the Ice Age was not decorative. It was crafted with precision, guided by need. Thick furs lined the body, layered again and again to trap warmth. Hides were stitched together with sinew using bone needles, simple tools yet powerful in purpose. Every stitch was survival. A gap left open meant cold could slip in, and in such a climate, even small mistakes carried heavy costs. By covering every part of the body, the head, the hands, the feet, humans built a barrier against winds that could cut like blades. Their survival was proof that patience and skill were as important as courage. The knowledge of how to craft clothing was passed from one generation to the next, whispered and shown by hands more than by words. A young child would sit close, watching as elders shaped fur into garments, slowly learning the importance of each step. Mistakes were corrected gently, for learning this skill was a matter of life itself. The tradition of sewing and stitching became a form of memory, linking people across time. In these small acts, humanity built not only protection but also continuity, ensuring that the wisdom of survival did not vanish with each passing season. Different animals offered different kinds of clothing. Reindeer hides gave both warmth and flexibility, while the massive mammoth, though harder to hunt, provided thick coverings almost impossible to match. Smaller animals added furs for lining, softer against the skin. Nothing was wasted. By Allah's will, every part of creation had its place, and humans learned to use what was given with gratitude. The world may have seemed hostile, but, within its harshness, it carried the means to endure. Clothing, born from the bodies of animals, was a sign of how humans adapted without arrogance, working with what had been placed in their path. The making of clothing was not done in silence alone. Around the fire, during long nights, groups worked together, stitching and shaping while voices rose in quiet conversation. In this way, clothing was more than protection, it was also community. Each garment carried the touch of many hands, the care of family and kin. Wearing such clothes was not only a physical defense, but a reminder of belonging, of being part of a group that labored together for survival. Every thread of sinew carried not just strength, but the bond of human connection. Preparing hides required more than scraping and drying. Oils were rubbed into the leather to soften it, keeping it flexible and durable. Smoke from controlled fires helped cure it, preserving the material from decay. These techniques, though simple in appearance, were the result of careful observation and trial. By testing, failing, and trying again, humans discovered ways to make garments last through harsh winters. This process was a testament to patience, a reminder that survival was built not on sudden victories, but on slow, steady learning. In every softened hide was a story of trial turned into endurance. When the time came to travel, clothing was often layered to match the severity of the journey. For short trips, a single covering might suffice, but for long hunts or migrations, thick layers were wrapped tightly, leaving only the eyes exposed. The landscape itself demanded this, for winds carried snow that could blind and freeze. The garments did not make the cold vanish, but they made it tolerable enough to move, to act, to survive. Each step across the frozen earth was made possible by these coverings, a quiet testimony that humanity's strength lay not in raw power, but in adaptation. The variety of clothing also reflected creativity. Some garments were lined with fur turned inward for warmth, while outer layers were reversed to repel snow and ice. Foot coverings were stuffed with grasses for insulation, absorbing moisture and keeping skin from freezing. Mittens, simple in form, preserved the dexterity of hands that would otherwise stiffen in the cold. These designs, though lacking in decoration, were clever, crafted with an understanding of how to make the most of every material. Survival was not only about strength, but about thought, about shaping the gifts of the earth into shields against hardship. Over time, clothing became more refined, shaped not just by need, but by practice. Stitching grew tighter, hides were treated with greater skill, and garments lasted longer. These improvements were not grand leaps, but small steps, repeated again and again by countless hands. This was the essence of Ice Age life: incremental progress, quiet perseverance. Humans were not rushing toward comfort. They were slowly, carefully, shaping ways to endure. In this process, clothing stood as proof that survival was not only about facing the cold, but about learning from it, adapting to it, and using what had been granted with care and humility. As the Ice Age pressed on, clothing became more than a necessity. It became a measure of experience. Groups who mastered the preparation of hides and furs endured the cold more securely, while those who lacked the skills struggled deeply. Survival was no longer only about hunting the largest animals, but also about ensuring their skins were turned into garments that truly shielded against the cold. The knowledge of treating, sewing, and layering was just as valuable as strength in battle. In this way, wisdom and craft carried as much weight as courage in the frozen world. Each garment carried with it the story of the animal it once belonged to. A cloak of mammoth hides spoke of great risk and effort, hunts that required unity and bravery. A reindeer fur jacket reflected careful tracking and patience. In wearing these clothes, humans were reminded not only of their own skill, but also of the mercy that allowed them to use what was given. Clothing was thus both physical protection and a living memory, a reminder that every piece of warmth was earned through endurance and gratitude. The garments also shaped identity within groups. Hunters often wore heavier coats, lined with thicker furs, while those who remained near the shelters managed with lighter coverings. Children were wrapped in layers of smaller furs, stitched together into bundles that allowed them to be carried easily during travel. In this way, clothing became a reflection of role and responsibility, showing who ventured far and who stayed near. It bound community together, not by uniformity, but by necessity, each person clothed according to their task and contribution. Travelers across frozen plains relied on their garments like a second skin. When snowstorms struck, they pulled hides tightly around their bodies, forming hoods that shielded their faces and mittens that locked in warmth. For days, they could march through icy winds, surviving only because every seam and stitch held fast. Their trust in these garments was complete, for without them, exposure would bring frostbite and weakness. In the quiet determination of each journey, clothing stood as the silent ally, allowing human feet to press onward across landscapes others could not endure. The preparation of clothing was often timed with the rhythms of hunting. When animals were most abundant, hides were taken and stored in bundles, prepared for later use. During the long winters, when hunts were fewer, people worked on these hides, shaping them into garments. This rhythm of gather and prepare mirrored the cycles of nature itself, times of abundance, followed by times of use. It was not wasteful but balanced, ensuring that nothing was left unused, and that every moment of labor was guided by purpose. Some garments were repaired over and over, passed down from parent to child, patched with scraps from other hides. These clothes, worn smooth by time, carried the marks of years of endurance. A seam might show the care of many hands, stitched anew whenever it began to fray. In this way, garments became heirlooms of survival, not valued for beauty but for the countless winters they had endured. They represented continuity, linking one generation's struggle to the next. To wear such a piece was to be wrapped in the history of family itself. The skills of sewing and hide preparation gave rise to early forms of creativity. Some groups decorated their garments with beads made of bone or shells, or with fringes cut into the leather. These touches did not weaken the clothing, but gave it identity, making each piece unique. Even in the harshest times, the human heart sought beauty, not for vanity, but for expression. By adding these small details, people marked their place in the story of survival, leaving behind hints of individuality within garments that were otherwise born purely of necessity. Over time, humans grew so skilled with clothing that they could travel further than ever before. Places once thought too cold became habitable, for their bodies were wrapped in layers strong enough to endure. This expansion of life across frozen continents was made possible not only by fire but also by fur, hide, and sinew. The two worked together. Fire gave warmth at rest, and clothing gave warmth in motion. With both, the reach of humanity stretched across mountains, valleys, and plains. Even in the grip of the Ice Age, clothing also influenced the way humans viewed their own resilience. To wear a coat of furs was to carry a shield against nature itself, to step out into the storm with confidence rather than fear. It gave people the sense that they were not helpless in the face of the cold, but capable of enduring it with patience and skill. Every garment, carefully crafted and carefully worn, reminded them that survival was possible, even when the world seemed designed to deny it. In this quiet assurance, hope found a place beside endurance, and so, the story of clothing in the Ice Age was not simply about hides and furs. It was about the creativity, patience, and cooperation that turned those raw materials into lifelines. Clothing was a shield, a memory, a tradition, and a statement of human determination. With every stitch, humans carved a space for themselves in a world of ice, proving that their strength did not lie in physical power alone, but in their ability to adapt and learn. It was another quiet victory, another reminder that even in the coldest of ages, life could be preserved through knowledge, effort, and the mercy granted by the Creator. When fire warmed the body and clothing shielded against the wind, humans still needed a place to rest. Shelter was the final defense against the Ice Age, a barrier that stood between fragile skin and the power of nature. Without shelter, warmth would escape into the air, and no garment or flame could protect forever. The earth itself, shaped by time and patience, offered many possibilities. Caves, hollows, and overhangs became the earliest homes, carved not by human hands, but by the slow movement of stone and water. These natural shelters were blessings, spaces where walls of rock cut the wind and ceilings of stone blocked falling snow. Inside caves, life took on a different rhythm. Darkness pressed in, but firelight softened it, bouncing across uneven walls. Families gathered close, arranging hides on the ground to soften the hardness beneath. The cave became more than stone, it became a refuge where warmth and safety joined. The air was heavy with smoke, the smell of hides, and the sound of quiet breathing. In this stillness, people found rest. For all its harshness, the Ice Age world gave such places of relief, reminders that survival was not only about struggle, but also about finding corners of peace hidden in the land. But not all regions had caves, and humans learned to build when nature did not provide. They used what they found: bones of great animals, skins stretched across wooden frames, branches bound together with sinew. A hut built of mammoth bones, covered in thick hides, could withstand winds that would strip warmth from an unprotected body in moments. To us, such a home may seem fragile, but to those who built it, it was as strong as any fortress, crafted with care, knowledge, and gratitude for what had been given. These shelters were reminders that the will to survive was stronger than the storms themselves. Building was not only about strength, but about cooperation. One person could not lift the bones of a mammoth alone, nor stretch heavy hides across a frame. It required hands working together, voices guiding, patience uniting effort. In this shared labor, communities were formed not only around fire but also around walls they built. Each shelter was proof of unity, a quiet structure that held within it the lives of many. It was not only a house against the cold, it was a circle of trust, a shared protection that belonged to everyone inside. The materials of shelter told stories of the land itself. In forests, wood provided frames, branches, and bark for covering. On open plains, bones and hides took their place. By the sea, driftwood and stones became walls against the wind. Wherever humans traveled, they learned to use what the land placed before them, shaping it into walls and roofs. By Allah's will, the world carried the means of survival within it, and people learned to recognize and use these gifts with humility. Shelter, in every form, was a reflection of both the land and the people who lived upon it. The inside of a shelter was often humble, yet carefully arranged. Hides softened the ground, piles of grasses created bedding, and fire sat at the center, sending smoke through holes or cracks. Tools were stored neatly near the walls, food hung from wooden stakes, and children nestled close to their families. The air, though heavy and sometimes smoky, carried the comfort of belonging. These spaces were not grand or decorated, but they were enough. In the simplicity of these shelters lay the heart of endurance, a space to breathe, to rest, and to rise again. Seasons shaped the building of shelters. In milder weather, lighter coverings were enough, simple lean-tos built of branches. But in the deep winters, layers of hides were piled thick, openings made small to trap heat, and fires kept burning night and day. Flexibility was key. What worked in one season could not serve in another, and humans adjusted with patience, shaping their shelters according to the turning of the year. In this rhythm, they mirrored the cycles of the earth, building not against nature but in step with it. Travel meant shelters could not always be permanent. Families carried hides with them, ready to set up temporary tents wherever they stopped. These shelters rose quickly, giving rest before another day of walking. Then they were taken down, folded, and carried forward. This ability to build and rebuild made humans adaptable, turning them into wanderers who could live almost anywhere. Their homes were not fixed to one place but followed them across valleys, rivers, and plains, as much a part of their survival as the clothing they wore. Shelters also shaped the way people imagined safety. To step inside was to feel the wind cut off, the snow silenced, the cold lessened. Even if only thin walls stood between life and storm, the difference was immense. In the quiet interior, the mind found rest, and rest was as necessary as food. The simple act of lying down without fear of freezing was itself a kind of victory. Thus, every shelter, no matter how small, was honored, not for beauty but for its role as a shield against despair. And so, building shelter was more than a task. It was an act of gratitude, a way of shaping the world's gifts into protection. It reminded humans that survival was not found in defiance of nature, but in working with it, learning from it, and shaping it into forms that gave life. Each cave, each hut, each tent was not only a structure, but a story of hands working, minds thinking, and hearts hoping. In this way, shelter became one of humanity's quiet triumphs during the Ice Age. Some shelters grew into places of memory, used season after season. When hunters returned to familiar valleys, they might find the bones of old fires, the marks of poles once driven into the ground, and scraps of hide that had weathered through storms. These traces reminded them that others had endured here before, that the land had already been made into a home, even if only for a short while. Returning to such places carried comfort, for it was proof that survival was not a lonely struggle, but a path walked by many over time. In this way, the land itself became a map of human endurance. The act of building also strengthened the bond between generations. Elders taught the young how to choose strong branches, how to stretch hides tightly, how to angle walls against the wind. Mistakes were corrected with patience, for every lesson carried the weight of survival. The younger ones, with eyes wide and hands eager, slowly learned the rhythms of construction. By the mercy of Allah, this knowledge became inheritance, passed from mind to mind without books or scrolls. A shelter was not only wood and hide, but also the living memory of those who had built before. Inside shelters, life unfolded in small but meaningful ways. The crackle of fire, the smell of cooked meat, the soft murmur of conversational filled the space with warmth that was not only physical but emotional. Here, parents comforted children, hunters shared their success, and plans for the coming days were quietly spoken. In these moments, the harsh world outside seemed distant, softened by the fragile walls that held them together. Even if storms raged beyond, within there was a calm that reminded them of the value of community. The shelter was not only a defense, it was a cradle of peace. Some shelters were temporary, built in a day, torn down in a moment. Others lasted through seasons, repaired and strengthened again and again. The difference was not in size or material, but in purpose. For journeys, lightness mattered. For longer stays, durability was most important. In this balance, humans showed their adaptability, always shaping their homes to match their needs. There was no single way to survive the Ice Age. There was only the wisdom of matching effort to circumstance. That wisdom turned fragility into resilience, weakness into endurance. Even the simplest shelters carried beauty. The curve of branches meeting above, the soft lining of firs on the ground, The smoke escaping through small openings spoke of design shaped by necessity. These forms were not planned for beauty's sake, yet they revealed harmony, a quiet reflection of balance between humans and their world. By Allah's will, every shelter stood as proof that the earth, even in its coldest ages, offered ways to protect life. Humans did not conquer the cold. They lived within it, shaping it into something they could endure. The shelters were symbols of this truth. Storms tested every structure. Winds clawed at walls. Snow pressed heavily upon roofs. Rain seeped into seams. Many shelters failed, collapsing or tearing apart, leaving families exposed. Yet each failure became a lesson. Humans rebuilt, adjusted angles, strengthened frames, and learned how to make roofs shed water, how to tie bindings tighter, how to choose stronger wood. In this slow process, knowledge deepened. Every storm that destroyed also taught, and every rebuilt shelter carried within it the memory of endurance. Thus, even destruction became part of survival's education. For those who lived through countless winters, shelters also shaped imagination. Within their walls, children grew, dreaming while watching firelight dance across ceilings of hide. To them, the shelter was not only protection, but the entire world they knew. They laughed, learned, and slept within its walls, forming memories of safety that would carry into adulthood. These spaces, though small, became the first homes in human history, places where life was nurtured, where bonds grew stronger, and where the story of humanity unfolded. Every memory, every dream, every whispered word was held within those walls. Shelters also reflected the seasons of life. Newly paired couples built spaces together, parents raised children inside them, and elders rested in them as they watched generations grow. The walls, made of wood, bone, or hide, bore silent witness to the cycle of life. In this way, shelters were not only practical, they became symbolic, places where continuity was preserved. Within them, time slowed, reminding people that survival was not only about facing danger, but about living through moments of tenderness. The shelter was a witness to life in all its forms. The combination of fire, clothing, and shelter created a balance that turned the impossible into the possible. Each one alone was not enough, but together they formed a circle of survival. Fire gave warmth at night, clothing gave warmth in motion, and shelters gave warmth in rest. Through this harmony, people endured storms, migrations, and endless winters. They had not mastered nature, but they had learned to live within it, using what was given with patience and gratitude. This balance carried them through centuries, keeping the thread of humanity unbroken. And so, the story of building shelter in the Ice Age is not only about huts or caves. It is about the human spirit, determined to shape the world around it into places of safety. Each wall raised, each hide stretched, each fire lit within those walls was a statement of survival. Though fragile, though temporary, these shelters represented hope in its purest form. They remind us that survival is not about strength alone, but about patience, cooperation, and gratitude. In the quiet glow of firelight, behind walls of bone and hide, humanity found a way to endure. This was the art of building shelter. In the frozen expanse of the Ice Age, food was not something found in baskets or markets. It had to be taken from the land through patience and skill. Hunting became one of the most important arts of survival, an act that required courage, unity, and strategy. Without it, clothing could not be made, fires would burn without meals to cook, and families would weaken against the endless cold. Hunting was not a sport, nor a pastime. It was the difference between life and death. Each chase, each track, each captured animal carried the weight of survival itself. The Ice Age was home to great creatures that roamed the plains, mammoths with towering tusks, herds of reindeer moving across the snow, and bison strong enough to resist the wind. These animals were both a gift and a challenge. To bring one down meant food, clothing, and tools for weeks, perhaps months. But the danger was great. A misstep could cost lives, for these animals were powerful, far stronger than the hunters who pursued them. And yet, guided by patience and by the will of Allah, humans learned how to face them, not with brute force, but with cooperation and cleverness. Tracking was the first step. Hunters studied the land, reading signs that might seem invisible to others. A broken twig, a line of footprints pressed into snow, the faint marks of antlers rubbing against bark. These details told a story, revealing where animals moved, where they rested, and where they might pass again. The hunters learned to walk with silence, to blend into the stillness of the land, so that their presence would not disturb the creatures they followed. Every step was cautious, every glance sharp, for success depended on patience more than speed. Once an animal was found, the hunt itself required unity. A single hunter could do little against a mammoth or a bison, but a group, working together, could surround, guide, and tire the creature, driving it toward difficult ground where it could be trapped. Voices called out in rhythm, hands signaled silently, and feet moved in careful patterns. This was hunting not as chaos but as choreography, a practiced dance of survival. It was proof that cooperation was as vital as strength, and that trust in one another gave power greater than muscle. Weapons were simple, yet they carried wisdom. Spears tipped with sharpened stone, arrows carved from wood and bone, and traps made with ropes and pitzel were crafted with care. Each weapon was not a tool of destruction, but a means of life, turning raw material into the possibility of survival. By Allah's will, the earth provided stone for cutting, wood for shafts, and sinew for binding, and humans used these with gratitude. The weapons were extensions of their patience, sharpened by thought and by the steady rhythm of practice. When the animal finally fell, there was no waste. Every part of the body was used: the meat for food, the hide for clothing and shelter, the bones for tools, and even the sinews for thread. This was not greed but necessity, shaped by gratitude for what had been given. A successful hunt meant not only full stomachs, but also the promise of survival through storms yet to come. Each portion was divided among the group, ensuring that none would be left to hunger. In this sharing, unity was strengthened, for the gift of survival was not for one but for all. The dangers of hunting were many. A mammoth might charge, scattering hunters and crushing anything in its path. Ice could break beneath careless feet, plunging hunters into freezing water. Blizzards might descend suddenly, hiding both prey and hunters in endless white. Yet, despite these risks, the people continued, for without hunting, life could not be sustained. Each danger became a teacher, reminding them to prepare carefully, to move with respect, and to never underestimate the power of the creatures they pursued. The hunt was a trial, but also a teacher. In the quiet after a hunt, when the fire smoked with fresh meat and hides hung drying near the shelter, people reflected on what they had faced. They remembered the risks, the close calls, the strength of the animals, and the mercy that allowed them to succeed. These moments became stories, told in low voices to the young, teaching them that hunting was not only skill but patience, not only courage but humility. The stories passed down through time carried the wisdom of survival, ensuring that knowledge was not lost to silence. Some hunts ended in failure, Animals escaped, traps broke, or storms forced people to return empty-handed. In these moments, disappointment weighed heavily, but it was not the end. Failure was met with resilience, for the group knew that survival depended on persistence. Another day, another chance, another effort, the hunt would always return, because hunger never left. By enduring failure with patience, humans proved that survival was not about perfection, but about continuing, even when the outcome was uncertain. Thus, the art of hunting was more than pursuit. It was a rhythm of life, a pattern of searching, chasing, failing, and succeeding, woven into the fabric of every day. It gave food, it gave tools, it gave clothing, and it gave unity. Without it, humanity could not have endured the Ice Age. It stood as one of the oldest arts, a testament to patience, cooperation, and resilience. And in every spear, every track, every shared meal, the art of hunting carried within it the quiet strength that allowed life to continue. Over time, hunting became more organized, shaped not only by instinct but by planning. Groups learned to study migration patterns, following herds across valleys and rivers. They understood when animals would move south, when they would return, and how the seasons guided their paths. This knowledge was precious, for to anticipate the animals was to prepare food in advance. The hunters became observers of the earth itself, reading the rhythm of creation and adapting their movements accordingly. Hunting, therefore, was not chaos, it was strategy shaped by patience. Some hunts relied on traps rather than direct pursuit. Large pits were dug and camouflaged with branches and snow, luring animals to fall within. Nets woven from sinew and fibers were stretched between trees, capturing smaller creatures. These methods required foresight and teamwork, for the building of traps often took days of effort. Yet when they succeeded, the reward was great, ensuring that food and materials would be available for the entire group. It was a quieter form of hunting, but no less vital, proving that patience was as powerful as strength. The art of hunting also carried ritual in its preparation. Not ritual of worship, but ritual of practice, checking weapons, sharpening blades, ensuring spears were bound tightly. These steps became habits repeated before every hunt, forming a rhythm that gave hunters confidence. By repeating these tasks carefully, hunters reminded themselves of the seriousness of what they faced. A small mistake in preparation could mean great danger in the field. Thus, preparation was not wasted time but part of the hunt itself, the unseen effort that made survival possible. Children grew up learning the art slowly. At first, they watched from a distance, observing how tracks were read and how weapons were carried. Then, they practiced with smaller animals, learning to move quietly, to aim carefully, and to respect the life they pursued. Only after years of patience did they join the great hunts, standing shoulder to shoulder with elders. In this way, the skill was passed down, not only as knowledge, but as identity. Hunting was not merely an action. It was part of what it meant to belong to a group in the Ice Age. The outcome of a successful hunt was more than food, it was celebration. Not celebration of excess, but of relief. Fires burned brighter, meals were shared more generously, and for a time, the weight of hunger lifted. In these moments, people laughed, told stories, and rested without the sharp edge of fear. Gratitude filled the air, gratitude not only for the hunters, but for the mercy that had allowed them to succeed. The meal was not just nourishment. It was a reminder that effort and patience had been rewarded with survival. But hunting also taught humility. No matter how skilled, no group could guarantee success every time. The animals were powerful, the weather unpredictable, and the land full of hidden dangers. Each failure reminded humans that they were not masters of the world, but part of it. Their survival depended on balance, on respecting the creatures they pursued and the world they lived in. In this humility, they found resilience, for they knew that survival was never their achievement alone, but a gift granted through mercy. Hunting demanded courage, but it also demanded caution. Too much haste could lead to injury, and a reckless step could put the entire group in danger. The hunters learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the patience to act wisely despite it. They approached with care, acted with unity, and struck only when the time was right. This balance of bravery and patience became one of the deepest lessons of the Ice Age, carried not only in hunts, but in every aspect of survival. In the stillness of winter nights, stories of hunts were painted on cave walls. Mammoths with curved tusks, bison in motion, hunters with spears, raised all captured in lines of earth-colored paint. These were not decorations, but memories, teaching tools for the young, reminders of danger and triumph. In these simple images, the art of hunting was preserved beyond words, carried into the future for generations yet to come. They stand today as silent witnesses to the endurance of those who once lived by firelight and by the hunt. The art of hunting was not only survival, it was connection. Connection to the land, to the animals, to one another. Each hunt bound the group together, shaping trust that could not be broken by storm or hunger. It reminded them that no one survived alone, that life depended on unity and cooperation. In this truth lay the strength of humanity, a strength not found in muscle but in the bonds between people. Hunting was the mirror that showed them who they were and what they needed to remain alive. And so, the story of hunting in the Ice Age rests not only in the spears and traps, but in the patience, wisdom, and unity that defined it. It was never only about chasing animals, it was about shaping life itself, turning struggle into sustenance, and danger into endurance. Every step on the frozen plain, every breath drawn in silence, every meal shared in gratitude was part of this great art. The hunt was survival, but it was also memory, identity, and resilience. And through it, humanity continued, step by step, across the cold ages of the world. Hunting provided great rewards, but it could not always be relied upon. Animals moved with the seasons, storms scattered herds, and sometimes the hunters returned empty-handed. For this reason, gathering became just as important as the chase. Humans learned to look closely at the land, noticing the small signs of life hidden beneath snow and frost. Roots, berries, seeds, and nutsall became treasures when found. These simple gifts of the earth were not as dramatic as mammoth hunts, yet they were equally vital. By Allah's mercy, the land offered both great beasts and small plants, balancing survival with variety. During the short summers of the Ice Age, the land blossomed with opportunities. Green shoots broke through the soil, bushes filled with berries, and trees scattered their nuts upon the ground. Families worked together to collect as much as possible, filling baskets woven from grasses and containers made of bone or hide. Each handful was gathered with care, for every piece might mean survival during the long winter ahead. Children often joined these efforts, learning from parents which plants were safe and which carried danger. Gathering was not only labor, it was education, repeated year after year. The act of gathering required patience and sharp observation. Not every berry could be eaten, and not every root carried strength. Some plants healed, while others harmed. To know the difference was wisdom passed down through generations, a memory carried in stories and in demonstrations by elders. Mistakes could be fatal, and so families trusted in the experience of those who had gathered before them. This body of knowledge, shared quietly around fires or during long walks, became one of humanity's earliest sciences, understanding the plants of the world. Once food was gathered, it could not simply be eaten all at once. To survive the Ice Age meant thinking ahead, storing 4 times when the earth offered nothing. Nuts were dried and kept in bags, berries were pressed into pastes, roots were buried in cool ground to keep them fresh. Meat from hunts was smoked or dried, made lighter to carry and safer to eat. These methods transformed fragile harvests into lasting supplies. In this way, gathering was only half the task, the other half was storing, preserving strength for days when hunger would surely return. Storage became a community effort. Hides were stretched to form bags, pits were dug into frozen earth to hold food, and stones were arranged to protect supplies from animals. Families worked together to build small reserves, treating them with the same care as fire. To lose a storage pit was a disaster, for it meant facing winter with fewer defenses. In this way, food was not only sustenance, but security. Every bag filled, every pit sealed, was a promise that the group could endure storms still to come. Gathering also gave balance to the diet. Hunting brought heavy meat, but plants gave variety and helped bodies remain strong. Berries carried sweetness and small bursts of energy, while nuts and seeds added richness. Roots offered strength during months when little else could be found. By Allah's will, these simple foods complemented one another, making survival more complete. Humans learned not to depend only on one source, but to weave together the gifts of both forest and field, beast and plant. This balance strengthened their bodies and their patience alike. The search for food often carried people across long distances. Families walked valleys, riverbanks, and hillsides, noting where plants grew best. Over time, they built maps in their minds, remembering where berries ripened earliest, where roots dug deepest, and where nuts fell in greatest numbers. These mental maps were passed from one generation to the next, forming invisible guides across the land. To know where to look was just as valuable as knowing how to hunt. Knowledge itself became food, carried not in bags but in memory. Gathering also gave moments of calm within the harsh rhythm of survival. Unlike the tension of the hunt, gathering was slower, quieter, more communal. Families worked side by side, voices low, laughter sometimes rising as children picked berries or discovered hidden treasures beneath the soil. These moments, though small, carried peace. They reminded people that survival was not only struggle, but also cooperation in gentler tasks. In these times, bonds deepened, and the cold world felt a little less severe. Gathering was not only work, it was also connection. Seasons brought urgency to gathering. In summer, people rushed to collect before the earth grew cold again. In autumn, they checked storage, strengthening supplies and filling gaps. Winter tested these preparations, revealing whether the work of the warmer months had been enough. Every cycle was a lesson, teaching that effort in the present carried consequences for the future. This rhythm shaped human thought, building patience and foresight. The Ice Age was not only endured day by day, but season by season, guided by the wisdom of storing what the earth had offered, and so, gathering and storing food became a second foundation beside hunting. One provided sudden abundance, the other quiet steadiness. Together, they balanced survival, ensuring that hunger did not overwhelm even in the hardest times. The art of gathering was not grand or loud, but it was steady, patient, and essential. It reminded humans that even the smallest seeds and roots, when saved with care, could carry life forward. In this quiet art lay the proof that survival depended not only on strength and courage, but also on patience, memory, and gratitude. Storing food demanded careful thought. A root left in the open might freeze and split. A berry left too long could spoil, and meat left unprotected would attract scavengers. To prevent this, people invented small systems of preservation. Meat was hung high where animals could not reach, smoke kept insects away, and deep pits, cooled by the frozen earth, acted like natural storage chambers. These methods were simple, yet they extended life far beyond the moment of harvest. By the will of Allah, the earth itself gave the conditions that made preservation possible. Humans only needed to notice and use them. The storage pits themselves became silent guardians of survival. Covered with stone or branches, marked only in memory, they lay hidden beneath snow. Families returned to them in times of hunger, digging through the frost to uncover what had been saved. Each pit was a promise from the past, a reminder of work already done, effort already spent. To open one and find food intact brought relief, not just for the stomach, but for the spirit. It was proof that patience carried reward, that foresight was as valuable as strength. Gathering also expanded into learning which plants could be dried, which could be eaten raw, and which carried healing qualities. Some leaves were brewed into drinks that soothed the sick, while certain roots eased pain. Others were avoided entirely, known for their danger. This body of knowledge grew slowly, shaped by careful trials and costly mistakes. It was not knowledge written in words, but inscribed in memory and tradition. In every family, elders carried these lessons, and in every generation they were taught anew, ensuring survival continued. The division of labor in gathering was clear and practical. While hunters pursued large prey, others spread out across the land, collecting what they could find. Children often joined, their small hands nimble in picking berries or sorting seeds. In this way, everyone contributed, no effort wasted. Gathering was not a task for the few but a responsibility shared. And in this sharing, bonds deepened, for survival was not only about individual skill, but about the collective patience of the group. During certain seasons, gathering became almost celebratory. Fields dotted with berries, or trees heavy with nuts, gave abundance that felt like mercy after months of scarcity. Voices carried across the land as families worked together, laughter rising among the labor. For a short time, the fear of hunger eased, replaced by the joy of filling baskets and hands. These days were remembered in stories, reminders that even in the hardest times, there were seasons of relief. Survival was never constant hardship, carried moments of ease as well. Still, the cold always returned, and with it, the test of preparation. Winter revealed who had gathered well and who had not. For those with stores full, storms and blizzards were endured with quiet confidence. For those without, hunger pressed hard, teaching lessons that would not be forgotten. The Ice Age rewarded foresight and punished carelessness, reminding people that survival was not only about strength in the hunt, but also about wisdom in the harvest. Thus, every winter became both a trial and a teacher. The preservation of food also shaped travel. Families who stored dried meat or nuts could carry them on long journeys, sustaining themselves between hunts. These portable foods extended human reach, allowing them to cross greater distances, settle in new lands, and adapt to changing climates. The ability to store was not only survival in the present, it was expansion into the future. It meant freedom from being tied only to the next meal, a small but powerful step in human history. Some storage methods became more refined with time. Meat smoked over long fires carried flavors that lasted, while berries mashed and dried into flat cakes became easy to transport. Seeds were strung together, creating bundles that could be hung and protected. Each small improvement added security, strengthening the group's ability to endure. These discoveries did not arrive all at once, but through slow patience, each generation adding a little more to the knowledge of the past. In this way, the art of gathering grew deeper, shaping resilience with every season. The effort of gathering and storing also taught gratitude. A small handful of nuts or a dried root carried more value than gold in such a world. Every bite was precious, every meal respected. Waste was rare, for nothing could be thrown aside when survival was at stake. This respect for food became part of daily life, a quiet discipline that shaped how people saw the world around them. They understood that life continued only because mercy allowed it, and that every gift of the earth deserved care. And so, gathering and storing food stood as one of the quiet triumphs of the Ice Age. It was not dramatic like the hunt, nor as visible as fire or shelter, but it was essential. In baskets of berries, in pits of nuts, in bundles of dried roots, humanity built its endurance. These small, steady acts carried life forward, ensuring that hunger could be met with patience. Gathering was the art of foresight, the science of memory, and the practice of gratitude. Without it, the story of humanity in the Ice Age would not have been possible. In the world of the Ice Age, survival depended not only on strength and endurance, but also on the tools crafted by human hands. Stone and bone, humble materials scattered across the earth, became the foundation of human ingenuity. By shaping these raw elements, people extended their reach, sharpened their abilities, and gave themselves advantages against the challenges of the frozen world. A sharp flake of stone could cut hides, carve wood, or shape meat, tasks impossible with bare hands alone. Every tool represented a step beyond limitation, a quiet victory of thought over hardship. The making of stone tools began with patience. Hunters and gatherers learned to strike one stone against another, chipping away until a sharp edge appeared. The process was slow, guided by skill and memory, for one careless blow could shatter the piece. The result was a blade, small yet powerful, capable of slicing through hide or cutting roots. Each flake was precious, often carried carefully in boughs of leather or tucked into belts. In these sharp edges, humanity found the ability to shape the world around them with precision. Bones, too, became essential tools. From the remains of animals came needles, awls, and hooks. Strong leg bones of reindeer or mammoths were shaped into handles, while smaller pieces were sharpened to pierce leather or carve wood. Even sinew, the strong fibers within animals, became thread, binding hides together. By Allah's mercy, every part of a creature carried use, ensuring nothing was wasted. These tools were not merely scraps of nature, they were instruments of survival, proof that humans could transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. The variety of tools grew with time. Scrapers smoothed hides, spears carried sharpened stone points, and hammerstones broke bones to reach marrow rich with strength. Each new creation solved a problem, easing labor, saving energy, or opening new possibilities. What once demanded hours of effort could be done more swiftly, allowing people to preserve their strength for other tasks. Tools multiplied human effort, making survival less desperate and more sustainable. They were silent companions, carried across journeys, used at firesides, and passed down from parent to child. Making tools was an art as much as a skill. Craftsmen, though they may not have been called such, sat for hours, shaping and testing, guided by memory and practice. Children learned by watching, picking up small shards, striking stones under careful eyes. Each generation added its touch, refining shapes, improving durability, and discovering new uses. This knowledge, though unwritten, spread across families and groups, becoming a shared inheritance of survival. In this way, tools were not just objects, they were lessons carved into stone and bone. Stone and bone tools also reflected the landscapes from which they came. In regions rich with flint, blades were sharper, thinner, more precise. Where bone was more abundant, tools carried heavier shapes, stronger and thicker for enduring tasks. Humans adapted to what the earth provided, shaping their tools not by desire but by availability. Yet each tool, no matter how simple, was shaped with the same patience and purpose. By working with what was at hand, people showed that survival was about adaptation, not perfection. The creation of tools required more than strength. It required vision, the ability to look at a rough stone and see the edge within, to hold a bone and imagine the needle it could become. This act of imagination separated humans from the animals they hunted. They saw beyond the present moment, shaping raw matter into instruments of the future. This vision was a form of resilience, allowing them to prepare for challenges not yet faced. In every tool lay both present survival and future possibility. Carrying tools also became part of daily life. Bundles of stone flakes, bone needles, and wooden handles traveled with families across plains and valleys. Each person had a role, and each role demanded tools. Hunters carried spears, gatherers carried scrapers, and those who built shelters carried hammers and awls. The weight of tools was the weight of survival, carried without complaint, for to leave them behind was to risk life itself. They were not luxuries but necessities, as vital as food or fire. The durability of tools meant they often outlasted their makers. A scraper crafted by one person might still be used years later by their children. These objects carried the memory of hands long gone, silent reminders of those who had once sat beside the fire shaping them. Tools became heirlooms of survival, not valued for beauty but for usefulness. To hold a tool was to touch the work of ancestors, to continue a chain of endurance stretching back through time. In this way, tools connected generations as surely as stories did, and so, stone and bone tools became extensions of human will. They turned weakness into strength, fragility into endurance. They were simple in appearance, yet powerful in purpose, enabling people to cut, carve, sew, and build. In every flake of stone, in every sharpened bone, there was proof of patience and perseverance. Tools were not only objects of survival, but also symbols of creativity, reminders that even in the coldest and harshest world, the human mind could find solutions. This was the quiet art of shaping nature into allies. Over generations, the crafting of tools became more refined. People learned which stones produced sharper flakes, which bones resisted breaking, and which woods provided the strongest handles. These discoveries were not sudden, but slow, built upon centuries of trial and memory. Each refinement added to the skill of those who followed, allowing tools to last longer, cut cleaner, and serve more purposes. The art of shaping tools was, in truth, the art of learning from the world around them. By Allah's will, each discovery was preserved in the minds and hands of those who endured. Some tools were made for hunting, designed to pierce the hides of massive beasts. Long spears, hardened in fire, carried sharp stone points bound with sinew. These were heavy and strong, meant to be thrown or thrust in desperate moments. Other tools were lighter, made for daily use: scrapers for hides, knives for cutting, needles for stitching. Together, they formed a collection that gave humans the means to face both survival and daily life. In this balance, tools were not luxuries, but lifelines. Each one carried purpose as clear as fire or clothing. The making of tools was not without difficulty. Stones sometimes shattered, cutting hands instead of forming blades. Bones splintered, wasting effort. Hours of work could be lost in an instant. Yet from these failures came new lessons. People learned how to strike with more care, how to choose better material, how to prepare bones before shaping them. Mistakes became part of the process, reminders that patience was as important as skill. Through this trial and error, the knowledge of tool-making grew deeper, ensuring that future generations faced fewer hardships. In some regions, certain materials became highly valued. Flint, with its sharp edges, was prized for cutting, while obsidian, when found, gave blades as sharp as anything known in the ancient world. Bones from large animals like mammoths provided strength unmatched by smaller creatures. These resources were not always available, and groups sometimes traveled far to find them. The search for good stone or strong bone became part of survival itself, just as important as the hunt for food. Tools, like meals, had to be earned through patience and effort. The sound of tool making was a rhythm of daily life. The steady strike of stone against stone, the scraping of bone against hide, the snap of sinew pulled tight. These sounds filled shelters and camps. They were reminders that survival was built not in silence but in the music of labor. Children grew up listening to these rhythms, learning them as naturally as they learned speech. Each sound was a lesson, shaping memory long before hands could shape tools themselves. In this way, the craft of tools was woven into the fabric of everyday existence. Tools also changed the way people saw the world around them. A stone was no longer just a stone. It was a blade waiting to be shaped. A bone was no longer a remnant of a hunt. It was a needle, an oar, or a handle. By seeing beyond the obvious, humans transformed their surroundings into endless possibilities. This shift of vision, this imagination, was as important as the tools themselves. It marked the beginning of a deeper relationship with creation, one in which nothing was wasted and everything carried potential. The passing down of tools also carried meaning. A scraper once used by an elder might be handed to a child, not only as an object but as a connection to the past. Such items were reminders that survival was not achieved in isolation but in continuity. Every tool carried history, every blade marked with the memory of its maker. To use such a tool was to walk in the footsteps of those who came before, adding one's own story to the long chain of endurance. Tools thus became more than instruments, they became symbols of legacy. In times of scarcity, tools were even traded between groups. A sharp blade might be exchanged for hides, a bundle of sinew for dried food. These exchanges strengthened bonds, creating connections that reached beyond families and tribes. Through tools, cooperation extended into wider communities, showing that survival was not only about taking from the land, but also about sharing with others. In this way, tools helped shape not only daily life, but also the beginnings of relationships between distant groups. Even after they broke or wore down, tools carried value. A shattered blade could be reshaped into a smaller scraper. A worn bone needle could still pierce thin hide. Nothing was discarded unless it was truly beyond use. This frugality reflected the discipline of survival, where every effort was honored and every resource preserved. By treating tools with such care, humans reminded themselves of the preciousness of labor and the mercy that allowed them to endure. Waste was not part of survival. Gratitude was, and so, stone and bone tools stood at the center of Ice Age life. They were not grand or beautiful in the way we think of beauty, but they were the lifelines of survival. With them, people cut, carved, sewed, built, and endured. Each one told a story of patience, creativity, and resilience. They were the proof that even in the coldest and hardest of worlds, the human spirit could find ways to adapt. The art of shaping stone and bone was the art of shaping life itself, and through it, humanity continued its journey across the frozen earth. Life in the Ice Age was never still for long. Animals moved with the seasons, rivers froze and thawed, and the land itself shifted with the turning of time. For humans, this meant that travel was not a choice, but a necessity. To survive, groups followed herds, searched for safer lands, and left behind shelters when the cold became too harsh. Traveling together became part of existence, as natural as breathing and as important as food or fire. Movement was not only survival, it was a rhythm that shaped the very pattern of life. Travel was rarely easy. Snow pressed heavily on the ground, rivers ran dangerously swift, and storms could sweep across the plains with little warning. Families carried what they could, hides bundled tightly, tools strapped to belts, food stored in bags of leather. Children were wrapped in furs, carried upon the backs of parents, their small breaths hidden against warm coverings. Every step was weighed down, yet the group pressed forward. Alone, the path would have been impossible, but together, each shared the burden, lightening it for the others. This was the meaning of traveling together, strength through unity. The land itself became a companion. Hunters remembered the curve of rivers, the shape of mountains, the places where animals passed most often. Gatherers recalled valleys rich with berries or hills where roots grew plentiful. These memories formed invisible maps, guiding families as surely as carved signs might guide us today. To travel was to carry knowledge of the land in one's mind, to look at the world and see not emptiness but paths, markers, and opportunities. In this way, survival became a journey through memory as much as through landscape. As groups moved, they adapted shelters for the road. Light tents of hide were raised at night and folded again by morning. Fires were lit, meals cooked quickly, and tools sharpened before the journey resumed. Each stop was brief, yet each carried the comfort of routine. Children learned that even in movement, there was order. Even on the road, there was a pattern of rest and labor. Travel was not chaos but discipline, a rhythm repeated again and again across endless distances. The bonds between people deepened on these journeys. Walking side by side for days, sharing food, helping one another cross rivers or climb steep hills, trust grew silently. When one stumbled, another lifted. When hunger pressed, what little was left was divided. Traveling together meant living with shared responsibility, where each person mattered to the survival of the whole. In this way, journeys became not only physical movements, but also journeys of the heart, shaping bonds of care and loyalty. Travel also shaped the way humans understood time. Days were not measured by clocks, but by the rising and setting of the sun, the distance covered, the rivers crossed, and the valleys passed. Weeks were marked by the shifting of herds, months by the changing of plants and seasons. The journey itself became the calendar, and the path beneath their feet was the measure of their endurance. To walk was to live. To move was to remember that life never stood still. The road itself was survival. Dangers met them along the way. Ice cracked beneath their steps. Predators lurked at the edges of the group, and storms forced them to huddle close for protection. Yet the presence of many gave courage, for no one faced these dangers alone. Spears were raised, voices called warnings, and hands pulled one another to safety. Unity was not an idea, but a practice, tested in every step of travel. Without it, the dangers of the road would have consumed them. With it, the dangers became challenges that could be endured. Travel was also a time of storytelling. As families walked across frozen plains, voices rose in quiet rhythm, retelling hunts, describing lands behind them, and imagining places yet to come. These stories distracted from weariness, lifted spirits, and gave children a sense of belonging to a journey larger than themselves. The path became less lonely when filled with words, and memory became lighter when carried together. In this way, traveling was not only movement of bodies, but movement of voices, weaving a fabric of shared memory. The pace of travel was steady, never hurried. To rush meant exhaustion. To lag meant danger. Instead, groups moved with patience, knowing that survival depended on lasting strength, not sudden bursts of speed. The steps of many formed a rhythm, steady as a heartbeat, carrying them across valleys and plains. Each day blended into the next, each night brought rest beside firelight, and the journey itself became life. In such patience lay the wisdom of the Ice Age, to endure by moving forward slowly, together, and so, traveling together became one of humanity's greatest strengths. It was not the strength of muscle but of unity, not the speed of one but the persistence of many. In each shared step, each shared burden, survival was made possible. The Ice Age was too vast, too harsh for individuals, but not for families bound together. Traveling became the thread that wove lives into communities, ensuring that no one walked the frozen paths alone. This was the quiet art of moving together, step by step, across the endless world of ice. As groups moved across the frozen landscape, the act of walking itself became a teacher. Step by step, people learned patience, endurance, and awareness. The earth was unpredictable, and each journey carried lessons. Some paths revealed food, others revealed danger, but all added to the memory of the group. Travel was more than reaching a destination. It was an education written upon the land itself. By Allah's mercy, each journey strengthened both body and spirit, shaping resilience that would be passed to the next generation. At times, travel demanded silence. Hunters leading the way signaled for quiet as they approached herds, while the rest of the group moved softly behind. Footsteps pressed gently into snow, breaths hidden beneath layers of fur. In these moments, the entire group became like one body, moving together in cautious harmony. This unity of silence was survival, a reminder that the smallest sound could shift fortune from safety to danger. Travel, then, was not always noisy and social. It was often quiet, careful, and deliberate. Other times, the road brought moments of shared relief. When rivers were crossed, when steep hills were climbed, when storms were endured, voices rose in laughter, relief, or song. These sounds carried through the cold air, warming hearts as much as fire warmed bodies. The memory of shared difficulty overcame exhaustion, giving courage for the miles ahead. Traveling together was not only about sharing weight, but also about sharing spirit, lifting one another when burdens pressed too heavily. This balance of silence and sound carried them forward. Children learned to walk within these journeys. Their first steps often came not in still shelters, but upon paths of snow, guided by parents who steadied them with strong hands. As they grew, they carried small bundles, learning early the meaning of contribution. Walking became part of identity, a reminder that survival required movement, not only for oneself, but for the group. In this way, the road shaped childhood as much as the home, teaching lessons no fire or story alone could offer. Traveling together also shaped trust in leaders. Each group looked to hunters, trackers, and elders who knew the land. These guides chose paths, decided when to rest, and watched for signs of danger. Their wisdom was respected, for lives depended on their choices. Leadership was not taken lightly, was earned through years of experience and proof of patience. Trust in such figures held groups together, preventing fear from dividing them in times of difficulty. In every journey, leadership was as vital as food or fire. Storms often tested this trust. Winds howled, snow blinded, and paths disappeared beneath white. In such moments, doubt could creep into weary minds, yet unity held groups steady. Leaders encouraged, families clung to one another, and fire carried within small bundles promised warmth when shelter was found again. To travel through storms was to face despair and overcome it, reminding every traveler that the mercy of survival was never far, even when hope seemed hidden. The storm, though fierce, was not endless. Long migrations sometimes stretched across months. Families followed herds into new valleys, leaving behind familiar caves for unknown plains. Each step took them farther from what they knew, yet closer to what they needed. In this movement, life itself became a journey of faith and patience. The road was uncertain, but the necessity was clear. Survival waited only for those willing to move. This trust in the path, this willingness to continue, gave humanity its strength during the Ice Age. Without travel, they would have remained trapped. With it, they found new beginnings. Journeys were also times of exchange. Groups that met one another upon paths sometimes shared food, tools, or knowledge. A flint blade might be traded for dried berries, a story of safe valleys shared in return for guidance through a river crossing. These meetings were rare but precious, strengthening bonds beyond immediate families. The road, in this sense, was not only a place of movement, but also a place of connection, where strangers could become allies. In the vast silence of the Ice Age, such moments carried great weight. Even in travel, rituals of rest remained important. Fires were lit at night, hides spread across the ground, stories told to soften the weight of exhaustion. Though far from permanent shelters, these small camps offered comfort, a sense of belonging wherever the group stopped. The repetition of these rituals reminded people that home was not only a place, but also the presence of family and community. In this truth, even the road became a kind of dwelling, carrying the feeling of shelter within movement itself. And so, traveling together was not only a necessity, but a way of life. It shaped memory, built trust, and bound people into communities strong enough to endure the endless cold. In every shared step, every shared burden, survival was carried forward. The Ice Age was vast and merciless, but no one faced it alone. Walking side by side, humans found their greatest strength, proving that unity could overcome even the hardest paths. This was the art of traveling together, the quiet triumph of movement and cooperation. In the silence of the Ice Age, when the nights stretched long and the cold pressed heavily, people carried with them not only tools and fire, but also ideas. They began to create symbols, marks, and images that gave shape to their thoughts. These were not decorations for beauty alone, but expressions of meaning, a way of remembering, teaching, and understanding their world. In caves, where firelight flickered, drawings of animals and shapes appeared on stone walls, enduring through thousands of years. These images whisper to us even now, reminders that humanity has always sought to leave traces of its inner life. The animals painted on stone mammoths, reindeer, bison, and horses were not only depictions of hunts, they were reflections of the creatures that sustained life, creatures that provided food, clothing, and tools. By placing their likeness on walls, people acknowledged their importance, preserving them in memory even when they were not present. To see these images was to remember the gift of survival granted through the animals of the earth. These drawings stood as silent teachers, passing down respect for creation to generations yet to come. Symbols also took other forms. Carvings in bone, patterns etched into tools, and lines marked on stones all revealed a desire to communicate beyond words. These marks may have been reminders of numbers, of seasons, or of stories. Though we cannot know their full meaning, they show us that humans sought more than survival alone. They wanted to record, to connect, to give shape to time and memory. In every small mark lay the proof that thought itself was part of survival, as necessary as food or fire. The act of creating these images carried its own rhythm. Imagine a figure crouched in a cave, holding a piece of charcoal or colored earth, pressing it gently against stone. Firelight dances across the walls as lines take shape, slow and deliberate. Each stroke is made with patience, guided not by haste, but by care. This process was not quick, it was a meditation of survival, a way of turning silence into something lasting. In this quiet, humans left behind more than shelter and tools. They left behind pieces of themselves. These symbols were also a form of teaching. Children, sitting by the fire, looked at the walls and listened as elders explained the shapes. A painted reindeer might remind them of migration paths. A carved line might tell of seasons, and a simple symbol might warn of danger. In this way, images became lessons, preserved beyond speech. They gave the young a sense of continuity, a reminder that survival depended not only on action, but also on memory. Knowledge was carved into stone as carefully as it was into the mind. The colors used came from the earth itself. Red from iron-rich clay, black from charcoal, yellow from minerals, ground and mixed with water or fat. These pigments became the paint that shaped the ancient walls. By Allah's will, the earth carried within it not only the means of survival, but also the means of expression. What was found beneath the soil could warm the body or leave its mark upon stone. In this way, creation itself offered humans the ability to speak without words, to leave messages that would echo beyond their lifetimes. Symbols also reflected the human need for connection. To gather before painted walls, to see the same shapes and recall the same meanings, created unity. These images were not private, but shared, belonging to the group as much as to the individual. They formed common memory, a story told not in speech, but in pictures. In this way, symbols became a form of community, linking people through shared understanding. They reminded groups that they were not only surviving together, but also thinking, imagining, and remembering together. The symbols were not only about the outer world, but also about the inner. A spiral might mark the passage of time. A series of dots might represent days or hunts. A carved shape might hold meaning known only within a group. These images spoke of thought deeper than necessity. They revealed a desire to understand patterns, to bring order to a world that often seemed chaotic and harsh. By shaping symbols, humans shaped their own minds, turning experience into meaning. Travelers carried symbols with them as well. Bone carvings were light, portable, and personal. A small etched piece might be kept as a token, reminding the traveler of home or of lessons learned. These objects were more than tools. They were carriers of memory, holding meaning far beyond their size. They gave comfort in strange lands, reminders that survival was not only about the present, but also about continuity with the past. To carry a symbol was to carry a piece of identity itself. And so, within caves and upon tools, symbols grew alongside survival. They were quiet companions, as steady as fire and as enduring as stone. Through them, humans found ways to teach, to remember, and to imagine. They remind us today that even in the hardest times, humanity has always carried within it the spark of thought. These marks upon stone, humble and fragile, became bridges across time, connecting us to those who lived so long ago. Beliefs and symbols were, in their quiet way, a second fire lighting minds as flames lit the night. The making of symbols gave structure to memory. When people looked upon a painted wall or a carved bone, they were reminded of hunts, of seasons, of lessons that must not be forgotten. These objects carried knowledge beyond words, turning fleeting experiences into lasting guides. By Allah's mercy, humans were granted minds that could not only act but also remember, not only survive but also record. The symbols were therefore not just marks, they were anchors of thought, binding the past to the present and the present to the future. At times, the creation of symbols gave comfort in hardship. To paint an animal on a cave wall was to bring it closer, to remember that the land provided what was needed. To carve a pattern was to find meaning in repetition, order in chaos. These acts calmed the mind, turning fear into focus. Just as fire warmed the body, symbols warmed the spirit, offering quiet reassurance in a world often filled with uncertainty. They gave people the sense that survival was not only possible, but also purposeful. Symbols also marked belonging. A group might use a specific shape or pattern to distinguish itself, to say, "This is ours, this is who we are." These marks were not grand banners, but quiet identifiers, seen only by those who shared them. They gave identity to groups spread across the frozen lands, allowing each to carry its own sense of continuity. Belonging was as important as food, for to know one's place in the group was to know one's security. Symbols, in this way, stitched invisible threads between people. The presence of symbols also shaped the way people imagined time. A series of marks could track days, moons, or the return of migrating animals. These early attempts at counting and measuring turned cycles into knowledge. By noticing patterns and recording them, humans began to prepare more effectively for the future. Symbols were not only reflections of memory, but tools of foresight, guiding decisions about when to move, when to hunt, when to gather. They were a quiet beginning of calendars, born not of writing but of marks upon stone and bone. Some symbols held meaning too deep for outsiders to understand. Perhaps they carried personal memories, or perhaps they reflected shared beliefs about life, death, and continuity. What we see today are shapes and colors, but to those who made them, they were full of meaning. This hidden depth reminds us that survival is not only physical, but also emotional and spiritual. Humans have always sought to explain their place in the world, to find meaning in hardship and hope in endurance. Symbols gave them a way to express this longing. The act of creating together strengthened bonds within the group. When families painted walls or carved patterns, they shared effort, intention, and meaning. The youngest added small marks, the elders guided hands, and in this cooperation, symbols became collective achievements. The walls of caves were not owned by individuals, but by the community, each line and color blending into a larger story. In this way, art became unity, teaching that survival was not only shared in food and shelter but also in thought and expression. Even when groups moved on, their symbols remained. Long after fire died and voices faded, the walls still carried their marks. Travelers returning seasons later might see them and remember those who came before, finding reassurance in the evidence of past survival. Symbols thus became silent companions across time, linking one group to another even when miles or centuries separated them. They were a form of conversation that stretched beyond words, spoken through shapes and colors across stone. The durability of symbols gave them power. Hides and shelters decayed, fires went out, tools wore down, but marks on stone endured. They stood as silent witnesses, refusing to vanish, long after their makers were gone. In this endurance lay a form of immortality, not of bodies, but of memory. The people of the Ice Age may not have known how far their symbols would reach, yet by leaving them, they ensured that their presence would echo beyond their lifetimes. The walls themselves became storytellers. In many ways, symbols mirrored the human desire for continuity. To survive day by day was necessary, but to create something lasting was to defy the silence of time. Symbols allowed humans to reach across generations, leaving behind not only knowledge, but identity. They reminded people that life was not only about enduring the present, but also about shaping the memory of the future. Through symbols, humanity declared that survival was more than breath, it was meaning, carried forward through marks upon stone. And so, beliefs and symbols became one of the quiet foundations of Ice Age life. They gave memory structure, hardship meaning, and communities identity. They stood beside fire, clothing, shelter, hunting, and gathering as another form of endurance. In every painted wall and carved line, humanity revealed not only its struggle but also its imagination. These marks were whispers across ages, telling us that even in the coldest times, humans sought not only to live, but to understand. In the quiet light of symbols, survival became a story as well as a struggle. The Ice Age was not a brief season, but an age that stretched across countless generations. For those who lived within it, survival was not a momentary challenge, but a way of life, shaping every breath and every decision. The endurance required was immense, demanding not only strength, but also patience, foresight, and unity. Every fire lit, every hide sewn, every tool shaped was a quiet victory. These victories were not dramatic, yet they carried humanity step by step through centuries of cold and uncertainty. Endurance meant adapting again and again. When storms destroyed shelters, people rebuilt. When animals vanished from valleys, hunters followed them into new lands. When the cold deepened, clothing was made thicker, fires burned longer, and food was stored more carefully. Survival was never a single achievement. It was a constant act of adjustment, a willingness to change with the world rather than resist it. This patience was as important as strength, proving that flexibility could be more powerful than force. The legacy of this endurance can be seen in the very spread of humanity. From valleys to mountains, from forests to frozen plains, people carried themselves into lands once thought uninhabitable. Each step into new territory was proof that survival was possible even in the harshest conditions. The Ice Age did not confine humanity, it expanded it, shaping communities that could endure in almost any climate. By Allah's will, Humans learned not only to live within the cold, but to grow stronger because of it. The hardships also forged deep bonds. No one could face the Ice Age alone. Families and groups relied on one another for food, for shelter, for knowledge, and for courage. This unity became part of humanity's legacy, teaching that survival was a shared burden and a shared triumph. Trust, loyalty, and cooperation were not luxuries, but necessities, and they shaped communities that endured long after the ice began to fade. These bonds were as lasting as stone, binding people together through every storm. Endurance also shaped memory. Stories of hunts, of journeys, of storms survived, were told and retold, passed from elders to children. These stories became guides, carrying lessons that could not be forgotten. They were not only entertainment, but also instruction, ensuring that mistakes were not repeated and that wisdom lived on. Through these stories, the endurance of one generation became the foundation for the next. Memory itself became a tool as vital as fire or stone. The legacy of the Ice Age lay not only in survival, but in innovation. Fire was tamed, clothing perfected, shelters built, tools shaped, and symbols carved. Each of these became the inheritance of future generations, shaping human history far beyond the cold ages. What began as necessity grew into knowledge, and that knowledge endured long after the ice melted. The challenges of the past became the strength of the future, showing that hardship could give rise to progress. The endurance of Ice Age people also transformed their view of the world. They learned to see opportunity in every stone, every tree, every animal. Nothing was wasted, and everything carried potential. This careful attention to the gifts of creation shaped a discipline of gratitude, reminding them that survival was not earned by strength alone, but by mercy and patience. Through this perspective, people endured not with despair, but with humility, recognizing the balance that sustained life. In facing the Ice Age, humanity also learned endurance of the spirit. The cold was not only a test of the body, but of the mind and heart. Hope had to be carried as carefully as fire, guarded against the winds of despair. Songs, stories, and symbols became warmth for the spirit, ensuring that even when bodies were weary, hearts could still endure. This resilience of the inner life was as important as food or shelter, for without it, survival would have been hollow. The endurance of these generations also shaped migration across the earth. Step by step, people crossed frozen rivers, climbed mountains, and entered new lands. Each migration was a thread woven into the fabric of humanity, spreading cultures, languages, and ideas. The Ice Age, though harsh, became the path that carried humanity outward, ensuring that its legacy would not be confined to one place. The endurance of those who walked the frozen world laid the foundation for the global presence of humans today. And so, endurance during the Ice Age was more than survival. It was the forging of resilience, the shaping of unity, and the birth of legacies that continue to guide us. Every fire that burned, every shelter that stood, every story that was told became part of this inheritance. The Ice Age did not break, humanity defined it, turning fragility into strength, uncertainty into wisdom, and hardship into legacy. In the quiet victories of endurance, humanity carved its place within the vast story of the earth. The endurance of Ice Age communities was marked not by grand victories, but by countless small acts of persistence. Each day that fire was kept alive, each night that shelter held firm, each hunt that provided food, all these moments accumulated into survival. This patience, repeated across generations, became a rhythm of life. The Ice Age did not demand sudden heroism but steady resilience, the kind that grew stronger with time. In these simple, repeated acts, humanity endured. Generations who lived through these times became bridges of knowledge. Elders carried memories of past winters, guiding the young through storms, migrations, and scarcity. Their wisdom was preserved, not in writing but in speech, in demonstration, in patience. The endurance of the Ice Age was not only physical but also intellectual, carried in lessons that traveled from one mouth to another, one hand to another. This living chain of knowledge formed a legacy more enduring than stone walls or shelters. Legacy also appeared in the paths carved across the land. Trails worn by countless feet connected valleys, rivers, and plains. These routes, remembered in stories and in minds, became the first maps of humanity. Long after one group moved on, another could follow the same trail, guided by memory left behind. The Ice Age did not silence the earth. It recorded human presence upon it, step by step, marking continuity where otherwise there might have been only emptiness. In the struggle to endure, creativity thrived. Tools grew sharper, shelters stronger, clothing more refined. Each difficulty gave rise to a new solution, proving that hardship could nurture innovation. This creativity was itself a form of legacy, shaping the foundation upon which future generations would build. What began as survival became advancement, carried forward into ages beyond the ice. The endurance of the Ice Age was not passive, it was active, inventive, and deeply human. Endurance also fostered gratitude. Each fire, each meal, each safe night was recognized as a gift, not guaranteed but granted. This awareness shaped humility, teaching people to see life not as ownership but as stewardship of what was provided. Gratitude itself became part of survival, softening despair and strengthening patience. In this balance, people endured not only with their bodies but with their hearts. Gratitude turned hardship into meaning, and meaning turned endurance into legacy. The legacy of endurance was visible in the spread of humanity into lands once thought unreachable. Across ice sheets, through mountain passes, along frozen coasts, people moved forward. They carried their fires, their tools, their stories, and their unity. Wherever they went, they proved that survival was possible, even in the hardest corners of the earth. The Ice Age did not confine them. It carried them outward, ensuring that the story of humanity would not remain small but vast. Every invention, every adaptation, every memory of the Ice Age continued to echo in later generations. The clothing shaped from hides laid the groundwork for weaving. The shelters of bone and hide foreshadowed the homes of later ages. The marks on stone became the ancestors of writing. What began in hardship became seeds of progress. The legacy of endurance was not only survival but transformation, carrying humanity from fragility into strength. The spirit of endurance also shaped identity. To know that ancestors had faced storms, hunger, and cold gave later generations confidence in their own struggles. The story of the Ice Age became part of the larger story of humanity, a reminder that resilience is not new but ancient. Each generation inherits this legacy, carrying within it the patience and courage of those who once walked frozen plains. Endurance became not just survival but heritage, woven into the fabric of human identity. And as the Ice Age slowly loosened its grip, the lessons remained. Even as climates warmed and lands changed, the habits of patience, unity, and resilience continued. They were not forgotten with the melting of the ice, but preserved in memory, in culture, and in tradition. The endurance of the past became the wisdom of the future, guiding humanity long after the cold had faded. In this way, the legacy of the Ice Age stretched beyond its time, echoing into every age that followed. Thus, the story of endurance and legacy closes the tale of survival in the Ice Age. It was not only a story of hardship, but of triumph through patience, unity, and gratitude. Humanity emerged from those frozen centuries not broken, but strengthened, carrying with it the tools, the knowledge, and the spirit that would shape the rest of history. The Ice Age tested humanity, but it also defined it, leaving behind a legacy as enduring as stone and as lasting as memory. And in that legacy, we see the quiet strength that carried life forward through the coldest of times. Thank you for listening to this long journey through the Ice Age, where humanity endured storms, hunger, and endless cold with patience and quiet strength. I hope these gentle stories have given you peace tonight, a calm rhythm to carry you into rest. If you have found comfort here, I warmly invite you to subscribe, so you may return whenever you wish to wander again through the pages of history told softly. In our next story, we will leave behind the frozen plains and step into the bustling world of ancient Rome. Together, we will explore what Romans did for fun, their games, their gatherings, and the small moments of leisure that shaped their daily lives. Until then, may the calm of tonight's tale stay with you, steady and gentle, as you close your eyes and drift into sleep.